One morning, you wake up, go to the store, and your money is worth less than the paper it's printed on. Not because of a war, not because of a natural disaster, because your government decided to fix a problem and chose the wrong tool. Here's what most people get wrong. They think hyperinflation is about greed or incompetence or some freak accident of history. It's not. It's a system, and once you understand the mechanism, you'll never read an economic headline the same way again. By the end of this video, you'll understand exactly how a government destroys its own currency while trying to save it. You'll see the pattern that appeared in France in 1720, Germany in 1923, and Zimbabwe in 2008, the same pattern. And you'll understand why economists today are still arguing about whether it's happening again right now. This isn't history. This is architecture. But here's the question nobody asks. Why does it always start with relief? Every single time John Law's France, Weimar, Germany, Zimbabwe, the first phase, isn't panic, it's prosperity. Prices rise, jobs appear, debt feels manageable, people feel richer. Then something breaks. And what breaks isn't the economy first, it's trust. That's the piece that gets left out of the textbook summary. And that's exactly what we're going to take apart today. John Law and France. Let's go to Paris, 1716. France is technically bankrupt. Louis XIV, the Sun King, had spent 40 years building Versailles, fighting wars across Europe, and running the royal treasury into the ground. When he died in 1715, France owed more than it could ever repay. Tax revenues couldn't cover the interest on the debt. The credit system was frozen. Into this moment walked a Scottish financier named John Law. Law had a theory. He believed gold and silver were inefficient. What an economy needed, he argued, wasn't metal, it was credit, paper. A system that could expand the money supply to match the productive capacity of the economy, not the weight of metal in a vault. On paper, this was brilliant. In 1716, France gave Law permission to establish the Banque Générale, essentially the country's first central bank. It issued paper notes backed by the state. The notes could be used to pay taxes. People trusted them. Then Law went further. He created the Mississippi Company, a trading enterprise with a monopoly over French colonial territories in Louisiana. Stock shares were sold to the public. Law's pitch was simple. Louisiana was rich with gold, silver, and untapped resources. Buy in now, and the returns would be extraordinary. Except Louisiana wasn't what Law described. The land was swamp and wilderness. But by 1719, almost nobody in France knew that, because the share price kept going up. Law merged his bank with the Mississippi Company. He began issuing paper money to fund stock purchases. The more money he printed, the more people bought shares. The more shares people bought, the higher the price went. The higher the price went, the more money he printed. You can see where this is going. At the peak in 1720, the Mississippi Company's share price had risen more than 3,000% in under 2 years. Ordinary people, servants, craftsmen, merchants had become paper millionaires. The word millionaire was coined in France during this exact period in direct reference to Law's system. But here's the thing about paper wealth. It only works if everyone agrees to keep believing in it. In early 1720, some of the early investors, aristocrats, mostly people close enough to the system to sense its fragility, quietly started converting their shares and paper notes into gold. Law noticed. He tried to stop them. He made it illegal to hold more than 500 livres in coin. He tried to force trust by decree. That's when the system cracked. When people learned that the wealthy were trying to escape the paper, everyone tried to escape the paper. The bank couldn't redeem the notes. The share price collapsed. By late 1720, Law fled France in disguise. What's important here isn't the drama, it's the mechanism. The debt was real. The political pressure was real. The desire for a painless solution was real. And a system designed to create short-term relief destroyed long-term confidence. That's case one. But the next example is in a different category. Because in France, the damage was financial. In Germany, it was civilizational. Weimar Germany. World War I ends in 1918. Germany is defeated, humiliated, and forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles in 1919. The reparations bill, 132 billion gold marks, an almost incomprehensible number for an economy already shattered by 4 years of war. Germany's new democratic government, the Weimar Republic, faced an impossible calculation. The economy was damaged, tax revenue was low, the reparations were due, and political pressure from every direction made cuts impossible. So they printed. At first, it worked, sort of. Inflation rose, but it also meant Germany's exports became cheaper. Unemployment fell. The debt, in real terms, felt lighter. There was a strange logic to it: inflate your way out of a debt denominated in your own currency. But by 1921, France and Belgium had lost patience with delayed reparation payments. In January 1923, French and Belgian troops occupied the Ruhr Germany's industrial heartland to seize coal and steel directly as payment. The German government told workers to stop cooperating, a policy of passive resistance. They promised to pay the wages of striking workers. The only way they could do that was to print more money. This is where the acceleration happens. In January 1921, $1 was worth roughly 60 German marks. By November 1923, less than 3 years later, $1 was worth 4.2 trillion marks. Think about what that means in daily life. A loaf of bread that cost 250 marks in January 1923 cost 200 billion marks. By November 1923, wages were paid twice a day, because by afternoon, the morning's wages had already lost value. Workers brought wheelbarrows to collect their cash, not because they were rich, but because the physical volume of paper required to buy groceries was that large. People burned currency for heat because it was cheaper than firewood. But here's what the textbook usually skips. The deeper damage wasn't economic, it was psychological. The German middle-class teachers, civil servants, small business owners had spent decades saving. They had bonds, bank accounts, life insurance policies. In 1923, all of that became worthless. Not reduced, worthless. A generation of Germans who had done everything right, worked, saved, followed the rules, lost everything. Not through their own failure, through a government decision. That experience didn't disappear when the inflation was brought under control in late 1923 with the introduction of the Rentenmark. It embedded itself into German culture and political psychology. Historians have argued for decades about the connection between the trauma of 1923 and the political chaos that followed. The hyperinflation didn't cause the rise of the Nazi Party directly, but it destroyed the credibility of the democratic institutions that might have stopped it. That's the part that should make you stop. It's not just that inflation wipes out savings. It's that it wipes out the trust that makes institutions function. And yet 80 years later, it happened again. Zimbabwe, 2000. President Robert Mugabe begins the fast-track land reform program, seizing white-owned farms and redistributing them. The intention, he argued, was to correct a historical injustice. But the execution was catastrophic. The farms that were redistributed largely went to political allies without agricultural expertise. Agricultural output collapsed. Food shortages began. The government faced a choice: cut spending and let the crisis play out, or borrow and print. They printed. By 2007, Zimbabwe's inflation rate was officially 66,000%. By July 2008, independent economists estimated it at 231 million%. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe began issuing $100 trillion notes, a denomination so large it became a global symbol of monetary collapse. Here's what's remarkable about Zimbabwe's case. The government knew what was happening. Mugabe's own finance ministers warned him. International institutions, the IMF, the World Bank, sent detailed assessments explaining exactly what the money printing would produce. The printing continued anyway. Why? Because stopping would have meant admitting failure. It would have meant cutting military and police wages, which meant political risk. The short-term cost of honesty was higher than the government was willing to pay. So it kept making the cost longer and longer until the entire currency system had to be abandoned. In 2009, Zimbabwe officially dropped its currency. The economy dollarized. People started using US dollars, South African rand, and other foreign currencies for daily transactions. The Zimbabwe dollar ceased to exist. An entire country's monetary system gone. And here's the uncomfortable question. Was Zimbabwe an outlier? A uniquely corrupt or uniquely incompetent case? Look at the pattern again. France, 1,720. Germany, 1,923. Zimbabwe, 2008. Three completely different countries. Three completely different political systems. Three completely different historical contexts. Same mechanism. Every time. The pattern. Let me show you the architecture. It always starts with a real problem. Debt, war, political crisis, something genuinely difficult. The government faces a choice between painful, honest solutions and painless, dishonest ones. The painless option is to expand the money supply. Borrow more, print more, defer the cost. In the early phase, this works. Prices rise gradually. Economic activity picks up. The debt feels lighter in nominal terms. There are even genuine beneficiaries, debtors, exporters, anyone holding real assets. Then the threshold breaks. The moment it breaks isn't when inflation reaches some specific number. It's when people stop trusting that the currency will hold its value. Once that trust breaks, behavior changes. People spend faster. They move money into hard assets. They convert paper to gold, foreign currency, property, anything that isn't the failing currency. And the faster they flee the currency, the faster it collapses. The government prints more to cover the gap, which accelerates the flight, which requires more printing. This is what economists call a loss of fiscal credibility. The IMF's working paper on high inflation episodes, published in 2007, describes this as the core mechanism in every historical case of hyperinflation they studied. The monetary expansion isn't the cause by itself. It's the loss of the public's belief that the expansion will stop. Here's the insight that most people miss. Governments don't usually intend to destroy their currencies. John Law genuinely believed his system would work. The Weimar government was trying to protect German workers. Mugabe's government was trying to hold on to political power in a collapsing economy. The road to hyperinflation is not paved with malice. It's paved with short-term thinking and the institutional failure to say no. And that's what makes the next part disturbing. In March 2024, the IMF published a blog post with a blunt title: Strengthen Central Bank Independence to Protect the World Economy. The reason it was published is worth reading slowly. Global debt levels following the COVID-19 pandemic reached historic highs. Several governments were running persistent deficits. And in multiple countries, there were political pressures, sometimes explicit, sometimes implicit, on central banks to keep interest rates lower than inflation would normally demand. Economists call this fiscal dominance. It's when a government's debt situation becomes so large that monetary policy, the central bank's decisions about interest rates and money supply, starts being shaped by what the government can afford rather than what the economy actually needs. In June 2024, the European Central Bank addressed this directly. A senior official's speech acknowledged the risks that central banks face when fiscal pressures from governments begin to compromise monetary independence. This is not a theoretical warning. The Bank for International Settlements, in its 2024 annual economic report, flagged that several advanced economies were operating in conditions where the historical fire breaks between monetary policy and political pressure had been weakened. Now, to be clear, this does not mean the United States, Europe, or the UK are heading toward hyperinflation. They are not Zimbabwe. The institutional depth, the reserve currency status, the international credibility of these systems creates enormous buffers. But the question isn't whether we're at the cliff. The question is what direction we're walking. The historical record says the most dangerous moment isn't when the crisis is obvious. It's when the first compromises are made and justified as temporary, as exceptional, as necessary. John Law's paper money was supposed to be temporary. Germany's money printing in 1921 was supposed to be temporary. Every single historical example of currency collapse began with a government that believed it had found a controlled, manageable way to avoid a harder choice. So here's what all three cases actually teach us, and this is the thing worth carrying out of this video. Inflation isn't fundamentally a pricing problem. It's a trust problem. A currency is a collective agreement. Every time you accept a dollar, a pound, a euro in exchange for real goods or real labor, you're expressing a belief that this piece of paper represents something stable, that the system behind it will maintain its value. Governments that destroy their currencies don't always do it through greed. More often, they do it through a gradual accumulation of decisions that each seemed justified in isolation until the credibility was gone and there was no way back. John Law's France lost its credibility in months. Weimar Germany's took a few years. Zimbabwe's took a decade. The speed varies. The mechanism doesn't. And if there's one thing worth holding from this video, it's this. The strength of a currency is not the paper it's printed on or the number printed on it. It's the political discipline and institutional credibility that stands behind it. Once that's gone, no amount of printing brings it back. Now you might be thinking, okay, so what do I watch for? That's the right question. And it has a specific, concrete answer. If you want to go deeper on that, the early warning signs, what fiscal dominance actually looks like in real time, and what happened to the ordinary people who saw these crises coming, that's the next video. If this gave you something useful, drop it in the comments. What part surprised you most? Was it France, Germany, Zimbabwe, or the part about today? And if you want more of this economic systems, historical patterns, the things that shape the world most people don't think about until it's too late, subscribe. That's exactly what this channel is built for. See you in the next one.